Hi, and welcome back to DS6001. This is Module 5, which is all about web scraping. Web scraping is a super cool topic. It's a little bit complex, but there are also some bigger picture issues that we need to think about if we're going to start doing web scraping. So let's get right into it. So web scraping, it's very cool, right? This is one of the topics in early data science, one of the topics in getting data that is just fun, right? You go to a website, you pull the data off, and you can have the data right there in a data frame for you to do things with. There are some amazing tools in Python to make web scraping faster, to make web scraping easier, and we're going to go over those today. And right now, at the time that this recording is being made, web scraping is legal. But that can be up in the air because there's a court case right now in federal court called HiQ Labs versus LinkedIn. And that's going to establish whether and under what conditions web scraping is legal. So it's pending, and it could go to the Supreme Court sometime this year. The background of the case is that HiQ is this startup that scrapes LinkedIn profiles in order to collect data on where are employees employed and what are the conditions around whether they would leave for another job. So they use this to build machine learning models to provide insights to employers about how to have better employee retention. So that's HiQ's business model, 100% dependent on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, a bit annoyed that HiQ is building the successful business by collecting the data that LinkedIn has on its pages, right? So LinkedIn issued a cease and desist letter, and the idea there was if HiQ ceases and desists, they go out of business. They've got no other business model. So HiQ sued, and they won in a lower federal court, a district court, and then it was appealed recently to a circuit court. In both cases, HiQ won. The court issued an injunction against LinkedIn, basically saying you have to allow HiQ to continue to scrape profile data from LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is appealing to the Supreme Court, and so this is all very much up in the air. There are many legal arguments around this case. They involve data ownership, ideas about intellectual property, and ideas about antitrust. So if you're interested in it, I strongly recommend reading more about it. There are some links on the Jupyter Notebook for this module that get into these issues in more detail. But even if this is all completely legal, there are still some ethical issues to consider. So web scraping might not always be the right thing to do. If you do web scraping, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. If you make many repeated calls to a website from a scraper that is now a robot that you've programmed, that could potentially overwhelm the server. And it's going to keep that website from being able to operate the way it should operate. So if there is a small business, right, and they have a website, they depend on that website, and you build a scraper and you hit it with an overwhelming number of calls and the server goes down, you're harming that business. So that is unethical, even if it is potentially legal, right? And so there's some guidelines for being an ethical web scraper that we should talk about before we get into anything else. First, if a website owner has provided an API and that API can give you the data you need, use the API. Always look for an API before resorting to web scraping, okay? The reason why we should be using an API is that the API is built to protect the website. It is built for the purpose of transferring data in exactly the way the website wants to transfer data. So you're really playing by their rules. You're being respectful of that website if you use their API instead. Second, and we're going to talk about this more in the next set of slides, but include a user agent string in your requests. That basically tells the website who you are and what you're trying to accomplish by doing the web scraping, so that if there's a problem, they can be in touch. Third, try as much as possible to limit the scope of the data that you request and the frequency of requests. So don't try and get everything in one fell swoop, because that size of a data transfer could overwhelm the website. And don't hit it with one request every nanosecond, because that could overwhelm the website. And so one last thing before we get into how to web scrape. Web scraping, as fun as it seems, it can also be very frustrating, because you choose a website and they've got all this great data, and then you go and you try and collect it, only to find that there are all these roadblocks, things that the website has done to prevent you from scraping. So let's talk very briefly about how that works. So every GET request you make is going to send your IP address to the server of the website you're trying to scrape. And because of that, the server that you're trying to scrape from will be able to tell who is scraping too much, too frequently, and too much data. If they catch an IP address that is engaged in that kind of behavior, they could block that IP address entirely, or they could start requiring a CAPTCHA, right? Prove you're not a robot, which your scraper is not going to be able to prove that it's not a robot. Websites, once you get the HTML, they might take steps to hide the data or hide the API endpoints in the raw HTML code. So what's visible on the screen would not be visible when you download the raw HTML. And websites will change their formats frequently in order to break these automated scrapers, right? So if you build a web scraper and you set a timer so that it scrapes the data every single day, well, after a couple weeks, a website changes its format and your scraper no longer works, okay? So these are all things that websites will do to prevent you from scraping. If you understand what these things are to begin with, then you can be less frustrated and you'll know exactly what to do.